So let's start then. So this is our 2025 new year, new trends. And I shared the links. I'm going to start with some social media stuff. And some of it is more seeing how things change, and others are more like newer tools. So more about some are more about changes, and others are about things popping up. Let's start with social media, and I'll paste some things in. It is more of a to come. I think it's like future trends. Some of this is based off, I think, like what we've been seeing so far, and then yes, the prediction possibilities of where this goes based off of things. A lot of this is taken from myself compiling various resources and also videos and things that other people have written about to compile some of this stuff together. They're not in any means like me prognosticating all these things, though me like picking what I think might be useful for us, and then some of things that are more driven by myself or others, right? So social media, some of the interesting thing, and I'm sure any of you, yes, predictions are hard. And many of you who do say social media or marketing, especially online, and I'm sure Zinnia can weigh in more with a lot of this too. Things have changed over the years in regards to how things are findable via search, right? Google search engines, algorithms, and what that means for like optimization of your website or other content. And also things have changed within social media platforms themselves, whether that be places like Facebook, and even Twitter has a thing this way where things have been more pushing from just you follow a friend or a page and that's the content being served up to you, to more and more content from non-friends and channels and pages that you might not be subscribed to coming for you. And more recently, in the last, more within this past year or so, there's also been a bit more influence of kind of almost that TikTok effect of really pushing the engagement of if you're engaging with certain types of videos, it's going to really heavily push from outside of that to feed you back those things in the hopes to keep you engaged, in the hopes to keep you on the platform. With those things in mind, say for all of us who might be still wanting to get the word out, the goal becomes a little bit less of trying to push to beat a numbers game of get as many followers and get as many things like that, though that still helps with your kind of validation that you are an expert in the space, but it doesn't always necessarily help the algorithm. So even in places like YouTube right now and Facebook too, there's just as much content served from outside of what people are following to then new stuff that they're pushing into that might be relevant things. So the goal becomes more of looking for the right content to attract the right audience rather than just focusing on everything you put. If you've got enough followers, anything you put out, everybody will see. And so less about that fans, like that number. Of course, this can benefit, I think, some of us, especially many of us who are organizations or creators, nonprofits, educators, because most of the time, if we're targeting what we are caring about or what our mission stuff is or what we're teaching about, we're much more specific. That will draw more people that are interested in that topic to find us and do that. That's good in some ways, that like the topical of what your content is about becomes a bit more important. But it does mean it may be a little disappointing as algorithms evolve at first, because you're like, hey, I have all these followers. Why don't they see my stuff? Even in looking at the stats on Nonprofit Commons on our Facebook page, and even I've seen this on other pages, like the views might be down for a little bit, but sometimes the engagement stuff is up. It's a funny thing, right? And that's a simplified summary of that trend. But because of that, in a way, and also just on its own, storytelling matters with social media, especially if you think about TikToks and so much content, both in videos and posts. And there's this move a little bit away from high produced things to more kind of vulnerable, authentic stories. So again, that can help you break through the noise and of things to have your stuff seen. And I think that's great news in that regard, that many of us, again, that are working on those social good or other impact driven projects are sharing meaningful and genuine stuff to begin with, usually. So that's what we do. So hopefully that is helpful. But that's something to be mindful as well, that if you're telling a story, maybe it doesn't have to be as polished if it's authentic. And that breaks through some of the like super polished or super just entertainment related posts that might be buzzing through social media. Another thing This is obviously not new in some ways, like I'm going to bring up like Mastodon, and that's been a bit. But this trend moving towards the often coined the Fediverse, but this decentralized and distributed networks versus central platforms like a Facebook or like a Twitter or X or things like that as a way to communicate and reach out to other people. So a little bit more so some folks away from interacting in platforms like that. So away from a single entity and a central authority. And then there's you probably have seen a lot more people recently moving towards blue skies and people posting about that on Facebook. Here's where I am on blue sky. Some of that is because of security or privacy issues or just general dissatisfaction again with larger social media platforms. But many people have moved on to tools or supplemented them, at least in the beginning, that this is also part of their mix. If you don't have a if you are, especially if you are also dissatisfied or looking for something a bit more security minded, you can look at things like Mastodon, you can even, and Blue Sky, both of which you can self-host or self-register your domains even. But even if you don't want to, you can create an account through either of those. It's a little bit more work in the beginning to find people because you're starting on a platform anew. But even if you just went onto Facebook and looked at your friends list and searched for friends that are posting about Blue Sky, you'll probably find a lot of people like, hey, here's my account on Blue Sky as a plus. And then once you start to follow people on a platform like Blue Sky or Mastodon, you could look at who they're following and start that you might also know or be interested in and start to build up from there. Also, Blue Sky has a lot of great things like lists, and people are sharing kind of lists of followers, and that's another good way, similar to Twitter, another good way to pick up followers. Yes, friend farming. I admit I am a friend farmer, Zinnia. And at least for right now, Blue Sky and Mastodon are there's a little less of the drama, a bit more of the conversation, so it feels a little more so like some of the earlier time period of social media. So we'll see how it goes. But it's a great place, I think, especially if you're working on a project and you want to talk about something, or you're a nonprofit and you're looking for social good cause people that to talk about similar things with, to do that and in a space that is much more kind of positive and focused. They're not replacements for something like a Facebook, more so for Twitter or other kind of networks like that. But that's another thing to look at and another trend. And I want to add too, for any of these things that I bring up today, like if we want to dive deeper into it, we can do that for a future kind of NPC meeting. And the other thing I would like to say is if you have a link to your profile in either of those two accounts or any other social media accounts that are a bit more federated or open, feel free to share them. Those happen to be mine. So if you would like to farm my friends or contacts, and you can see both who is following that person and who they follow, and both are great places to look at and to see if you find people that might be of interest. And there are a lot of large people, especially in the nonprofit sector. Beth Cantor is always there. She's a great person. She's already created a list for nonprofits in using Blue Sky, and she happened to put me on it too, so it's nice. So this is a good time too if you maybe want to jump out as an influencer in the space or somebody that like other people might. It's a good time to test those waters. And I'm going to move on, but feel free to obviously leave comments. This is a deeper one. This is not like this is in some ways, and we're going to get into a lot of AI things too. So this is in some ways like a good middle ground between using AI to then funnel in a bunch of data to be able to then help you analyze what trends might be happening now that then will be carrying forward. Friend farming just means that when you're on a social media, less so on a Facebook, but on sites like X or Blue Sky or like Mastodon, like we're talking about, you'll see somebody's profile and it will tell you who they follow and and also who follows them. And often, if you can find few key people at first, because it can be daunting in the beginning to start off finding friends in a new platform. If you can find a few key people, and certainly I shared my link, you can have my link to my profiles in both of those. Although my profile's more fleshed out on Blue Sky, I'm not used Mastodon as much. But you can start to then look at who they follow and who follows them, and look at profiles, click on them, read the little summaries, see if some of who your friends follow and who follows your friends might be also useful people for you to put like to follow. And so it's a little bit less like in Facebook, it's about friending and they're like deeper ties, or LinkedIn, it's like that too. But in a platform like Twitter slash X or Blue Sky, it's a bit more open that you could follow somebody and there doesn't necessarily have to be a scenario that you even know them. It's more about, are you interested in following along and listening to what they're sharing. Fediverse just means they're federated. So that's the Fediverse is like a term for the federated web. So, like, you think about the metaverse, it is analogous to that. So, it's the concept that websites themselves, if you self-host your own website, you are part of that too, right? The idea that these are things that are not part of and not part of a bigger, larger central platform, so it's more federated. By federated, it also means some of those take that even more, where you could self-host your own identity or content, and then you're just plugging into the network structure to be found and to be interacting with folks. So it's a bit nodal, right? Like a node where like maybe there's the scaffolding of Mastodon, but you can control your own content and your own profiles and how you're engaging, but you still have control of some of that. So there's gradations of what that means on any particular platform, but it's less about a central platform kind of controlling things, everything. Hopefully that helps. Yeah, yeah. Oh, is that Google Sites, or is that, I don't, what tool are you using, Gentle? Because it's not like your own, it's not like your own website, right? Is this when search comes up? Oh, hmm. We'd have to probably dive into that deeper to understand that and to see. And Google may be serving up some things regarding search. That's another thing to be mindful going forward, that as laws change, right, and the EU has getting harder on privacy things, which are good, right? Good for the end users. But especially the web is international, right? So it still affects those of us in the US who might want our content served up elsewhere. Yeah. But we'll have to check into that, Gentle, to understand that more, probably beyond this after. And I'll just repost this piece again. Here's this. This is an example of how Trust Insights, which one of the founders of it is actually one of the co-founders of the concept of PodCamp, right? The open source meetups for podcasting that started, I don't know, 2007 or 6, and then became, like a lot of unconferences, just a movement, right? His name is Christopher Penn. I've shared his links before. This Trust Insights is like a marketing analytics company that he runs with a few others, and he's very big into AI, so he's great to follow. And if you want to understand certain concepts, especially with how he's using, like, taking his own data and running things through Google's Gemini or other tools to be able to get insight both off of his or his clients' data, right? Like, we could do that for MPC, load in lots of the chat transcripts and be able to then analyze things or ask questions of it, right? Which is on the docket to explore some of these things. But what he did is he did a search through Reddit of what people had been talking about. I don't know if it was the last 6 months within related um, Reddit channels that were focused around various types of topics that related to marketing, and of course marketing and AI and marketing and other things. And threw all that together and used AI to analyze it and came up with, this is a 90-page document. There's no way something you're going to read now, but it's a great thing to skim through because it's got it's like almost listening in on the ground of a place like Reddit, to be like, what are people like on these large forums, to be like, what are people talking about? What questions are they asking? What are they wanting to know going forward? And it's a good way to get a feel for on the ground things that might be moving beyond what we all see in our little niches. You don't have to read the whole 90 pages, but I encourage you to download it and maybe get a look for, are there topics and things in there that relate to maybe some stuff that you can look at that might be things for you to think about. So it's another place to find even more trends and things to explore that could carry forward. And then, of course, then we move into AI. And as we know, AI has been everywhere. I think 2 years ago, I was here talking about, at this particular time of the year, talking about artificial intelligence, generative AI stuff, right? And how much has changed in that 2 years. Um, and it's not going anywhere. So it has that possibility to disrupt anything slash everything. There's definitely a lot of hype still at this point. So some people see it as like a game changer for everything. Some folks are still juries out or thinking about things. There's a lot of thoughts in there about what it means. I put a quote in there in that thing that Sam Altman, and this is we're still talking about the marketing, right? This is a good segue between the AI, the marketing and the AI stuff. That in early 2024, he said that AI will handle 95% of marketing work done by agencies and creatives, which is both amazing because you've got a new tool or set of tools to help you do these things, but also pretty daunting and scary for folks who, even like myself, who make their livings based off of these things. And that, again, that plus side being that AI can help content creation become easier and simple to middle task related stuff. Like we were talking about just the example, like just using AI to analyze a whole lot of data easier. So it's certainly useful for those of us who are like just many individuals, and also many of us who are working on educational or nonprofit related things to sort of sort through and analyze. So smaller orgs and businesses as well, who don't have that, maybe that talent or resources to either create or even look at or analyze any of those things on a normal basis if it wasn't for those AI tools. And of course, that downside is that there's not a lot of that not a lot of this content will be good, right? Because it's easy, and I've got a couple examples later on. It's easy for AI to be wrong, or it's a large language model. And at the end of the day, it's like you're putting in a bunch of content, or you're asking it for a bunch of content, and how it's pulling things together, the context. And even the facts may be jumbled in ways that are make it absolutely non-truthful or unreliable. And then, so quality control becomes super important. And of course, Val was bringing up the digital literacy related, meta literacy related stuff. There's also more of a problem, not only just understanding it, and that's important, but also how these tools, as we've talked about before, can be manipulated to not just be unintentionally untrue, but actually disinformation where somebody wants it to not, to sway you otherwise, and knows that it's not true when they're creating that content. Let's move into the AI stuff, like the AI trends. Yes, thank you, Val. That's great. Yes, a great segue. And some of this other stuff will also kind of prime the pump a little in regards to AI. Often when like Lear and I have done a bunch of workshops here at NPC and other places, and sometimes with others on AI and a lot of things about related tools and stuff like that. Today, I wanted to lead with the ethics and impact because I think often that kind of gets pushed to the end of, hey, here's all the cool tools. And I wanted us to touch on this first a little before we get deeper into cool tools because it's often a question, right? And so as I said, just in these last couple of years, we have all heard and talked about a lot about AI, and it's everywhere. Even like common people you could have a conversation about what they think about AI, which wouldn't have been the case a couple of years ago. So both the generative tools and that we've all been using, and then also the larger implications, the good and bad of AI, that sort of thinking about the ethics of that. And I had just mentioned Sam Altman's quote, but I want to paste that here. But he's running ChatGPT, which as of December, at this point, 300 million weekly active users. So think about that, right? And that's like a link to cite that. How back to that idea that like more and more people not only know about but are using these tools. That number is huge. And many of those people are actually paying customers. So there's a lot of businesses. So at this point, the tech and the tools aren't something that can be ignored. And we've talked about this in the past that when we have these conversations about AI and the uncomfortability sometimes of like, why are we talking about this? Why do we need to talk about? Should we use these tools? But we just can't ignore it. Pandora is long out of that box, or what was in the box has all long been opened by Pandora, I should say. And and we've also said this before, that that because of that, it's as important that we learn as much as we can to use what makes sense for our professional and personal projects and ourselves, and hopefully is as ethical as as ethical of a way as possible. Um, and I'm going to bring up a few organizations and projects and things that kind of fall in that. Yeah, why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about this again? And some of these are resources you can explore later on. There are also some of them, or a lot of them, should be linked in the Pinterest board if you are more of a visual person that wants to peruse them that way. And this is not an exhaustive list, right? This is just a few things within our time to talk about. Mozilla's trustworthy AI. That Mozilla has a trustworthy AI focus that their foundation, the Mozilla Foundation, is working on, and there's a link to that. And so there's a lot of thought leadership and even some hackathons and some other things they've done along with it, and including creating tools and encouraging others to create tools. So they have a whole list of projects that they're focused on and tools that is on that second link, like the projects link. And they have a great AI guide, which I encourage you to bookmark or download. That's at that third link, the Mozilla AI guide. And like peruse through that, like the list of projects, and there's even some interesting tools. A lot of them are geared towards coders and developers because they're trying to also hit the ecosystem at the point of developers thinking about creating more ethical just tech in general, because it, at least for things like AI, that's part of that problem, is that some things, like a lot of large language models, were created by scraping the web. Was that ethical? Certainly not. A lot of stuff like that. So Mozilla's trying to focus too on the developer side of things, but there are some user-friendly tools, like, and there's a link to that AI-driven website builder called Solo, and you can check that out there too. And it walks you through without needing to code how to create some simple websites. So if you had a project thing or you wanted to learn about that sort of stuff, that might be a thing to explore. And that's an AI created, or a tool that's using AI to create those. So it's another good use also of AI being used for a better scenario. If you want to dive a little bit deeper into the ethics or uses of AI for social good, we've talked about MOOCs before, massively online courses, open online courses. You can explore some of the ones that they have. They have several. Coursera has this concept of specializations, where people could say sign up and get a certificate in it, right? And you have now a certificate in using AI for good. Anytime that you want to get a certificate in Coursera, that does cost money, so be aware of that. But you can absolutely take the classes, any of the classes individually. You can look at the AI for good, and take a class and just audit it as it is without caring about the certificate, and you can take it for free. So there's several in there that talk about kind of the impact of AI. There's just a 3-course little grouping. And then there's one from IBM on the ethics of generative AI, which is interesting as well, which kind of dives a bit deeper. Again, this is a lot of like future stuff, extra readings, a lot of kind of homework and things to dive into during the course of the year if you want to explore various things of some of these sort of trends or future things. And I encourage you, if you take any of those Coursera classes or you dive a bit deeper into anything I've shared here, come back and present at a future NPC meeting and share that back on those specific things, because I could not dive deep, and none of us could, with all these things. So again, it is helpful for that. For educators, and I know just with you, Lear, alone, when you've brought up, and we've had conversations too about the impact of AI, not only in regards to students and using it more and often in not the best ways, right? And there's a lot of problems with even just wholesale writing of a project that didn't come from the student. And you can add more thoughts on that if you want in the chat. But it was an interesting resource I came across. Cornell University put out a report that's quite a big, long report on using generative artificial intelligence for education and pedagogy. And you can look at it as a website and just read it, go link by link in the topics, or you can download it in PDF form. And there's also more to that section. Like Cornell has a whole section on both, some of it that's very explicit to them and internal, and then more that's an external resources for all about some of these, thinking about how generative AI specifically, how it could be used within the curriculum, or even some of that other side of it, like how do you assess for that too, right? Yeah, Lear, absolutely. Yeah, that's that whole like vetting content. Yeah, and Corin, I'm reading your question about that OpenAI 300 million users, about what percentage of users understand the basics about how large language models and tools like ChatGPT actually work. I know that they do have a high rate of those 300 million users. There's a good percentage, which is why they've made a lot of money. There's a good percentage that are paid users. Presumably, they're folks that are trying to actively explore it, at least, whether they understand the workings underneath it or how to effectively engage with it, like what makes good prompts based off of the kind of content and tools they might be working with. It'd be interesting to search for those kind of things. And especially, yeah, that comes to that second point of the quality prompts. And I would like to say that varies from type of what it is generating. Is your tool or your use such that you want to generate text or analyze data or create images or create video, and prompts vary across the board and how that might mean. And we'll chat a little bit about that when I talk about video. Like when you're doing video prompting, it's going to expect you, or it's built off of this idea of video and photography terminology. So if you can tell it this kind of shot, like I want it to pan left, I want this kind of shot, and I have some links for things like that. It outputs things better. And the same thing we've talked about before about imaging. If you think about how those models were trained, it's almost like they're walking into a gallery and getting all this information on style and who did it and what's happening. And I think large language models are trying to make up for some of this and make things a bit more easier. Another good resource in this, or another good thing about this ethics line of stuff, is recently, this is a code repository that I'm linking to, so it's not going to be useful for much, but you can definitely read about it. There's a little description about it there. There's a tool called Common Canvas, and it's built off of Open Diffusion, which is an open source generative AI model. And but they worked on training it. So just take Open Diffusion, you can create and train your own models. And there's a model that Open Diffusion was using, or a couple models that they were using, and other people have created other models based off of other needs. This is a particular model that was creative, only using Creative Commons images. So no web scraped stuff, no things that would point to other people's copyrights or those kind of things. So the base model itself is more ethical to begin with. And granted, it's not going to probably be as tailored and glorious and shiny to apply to things like it's not at a place where you could compare it to like what Midjourney might bring you as a generative image, but it's a great starting point that people will continue to improve on for an open source and ethical, creatively common source thing. Okay, there. And I have to try to get through as much of this. I'm also going to bring up some tools. Some of it, a lot of this is, I'll list a few here. A lot of them are focused around video. So let me see what I can do here. Some of these you cannot play with yet because they're still in testing. I'm going to bring up Google's VO and Adobe Firefly's video generator. They're not open. You can have to sign up to be able to be in their trial, which if you're curious about it. But another thing for a trend is that video video created by generative AI is definitely going to hit. As we've seen with 2D images, this year I think is really going to be this push for like generative video to become more attention at and more realistic, which again is good and bad, right? Great if you want to create some simple things for your own stuff. Bad if you are worried about misinformation. um, and I'm going to put some links here for the other stuff. Here's the Google VO, and for Adobe Firefly. And again, those you can get on the wait list. You can look at their site to see what they are capable of right now. And there's lots of videos and some links to some other things that you can do. But you can definitely explore OpenAI's Sora, though you need a paid account to do it. So if you happen to have a paid OpenAI account, explore Sora. A good one to start playing with, and we've talked about Runway before, though we've never really talked too deeply about it, but it's another generative AI kind of platform that has a suite of tools that you can use to create various 2D and 3D related stuff. Um, and there is a free account that gives you a certain amount of credits that you can create a certain amount of content with. So you can absolutely test it now. And I created a little, by using a photo that I loaded in, I created a short moving image of that. And again, this is a place where your prompts need to relate to video and photography. For it's got within its understanding of that as the language and how to move the camera around as it does the video. And let me give you the link to those, the link that I created, and also a link to a YouTube of somebody else doing they were using the kind of example of creating an AI generated music video. So they were using Sora to create the music part of it. And then the second part of it was working with Runway's video tool to be able to create the part of that music video. And I think it's a useful thing to bookmark. You may not be interested in creating AI music videos, but you can use that same techniques. And he breaks down some of that cinematography type language and prompting. So it's good for that. Look at that. And again, you can always go back to this document. And I'm going to wrap here. Soon. So the idea that 2025, as it is, things keep moving fast. Play with these things and explore also how they might be useful tools for the work that you do, not just potential problematic things. I'm linking there how Avacon's beginning to use AI tools, both in what we presented at OSCC with the speech to text, and hopefully that becomes a tool. We're working with some students at MIT. There's a link to the presentation there. You can look at that later. And then we've talked about this tool too, the exploration of playing around with Zapier's chatbot tool. And I have a link below, but also, and I'll actually get to take this out of order for a second. Similarly, and this isn't how it is in my notes, similarly, Linden Lab also recently announced that they are going to be working on AI generated agents with the help of Convio, which is a tool that you can see there too, and explore that. Also, another tool to explore is Google's NotebookLM, which is really interesting because you can load in both links to videos that have been transcribed that'll pull in the transcriptions from, put in your own documents or link to Google Docs. It'll take that content all in and create like summaries or little like lesson plans or like frequently asked questions, and the most interesting thing, can create this sort of little mini live podcast where it does a summary, but it has two voices talking about it, which that second link is the link to. I've loaded in all of OSCC's transcripts for the 2 days worth of content, and I loaded in the link to the live streams, which include both days, which include the content, and it's very interesting to see how it summarized it. Again, it's jumbling some things together that aren't quite accurate, but for some things that are a little simpler, it might be a bit more accurate versus 20 something hours worth of content all smushed into one. Yeah, that is really pretty cool. And I also did it with these notes. I just had it pointed to this Google Doc. You will, for that I shared with you guys, and that's a shorter thing. You see that it tends to make a 10-minute podcast, and then longer content, it doubles that time, it looks like. So the OSCC one is 20 minutes. It's just linking to this one notes document, which doesn't seem to be quite enough time, but quite enough content for it to use. So it does some repetition. But it's interesting, and it could be a useful way and we can test this going forward. I will probably do that. Some of these meetings or your events that you're at where you've got like a chat transcript, you maybe have speakeasy and you have people putting comments in chat, and maybe there's a video and there's conversation that happens. You could load that all into large language model and ask it to give you both notes and a timeline of what people talked about. In text, it does these things, and an FAQ and all this stuff, and do this little podcast conversational thing. Oh, I just pasted that again. Never mind the Linden Lab Convio stuff. And yeah, so that's it for what I have for tools. Yes, yeah, it is really interesting. It's a little bit gentle. I'm bringing this up if Gentle's still here, but it's a little bit like what Lear presented on at the virtual ability conference recently. They definitely have tried to make efforts in putting in more conversational like quirks and how people might talk and a thing like that. And it obviously they must have done, they intentionally pushed it on trying to replicate a kind of two-person NPR like ish or kind of session about talking about a thing. And it's interesting how what it pulls out. You could definitely listen to both those files, and especially for this one where you've been experiencing it live, like that shorter one, you can see like how does it stack up what it did for a summary. And again, it's not enough content, so it's repeating things, but it's definitely very interesting. And I'm recording this right now, mostly because I want to, you can continue to keep iterating your little notebooks you create in this Notebook LM. And so if you add more content to it, you can download what the first version was and delete the summary, the voice summary, and create a new one. And so I'm going to add this video where I'm more riffing off of things to see if that actually adds anything more or less, who knows. And so things to explore. I also wanted to leave you with some questions, like just in general. And certainly some of these things I would love to know, even on the NPC presentation side of things. Like I'm putting forth a bunch of these tools, other things that are going to come into play too. And you may have your own. We didn't even talk about things like we've done in the past about like fundraising and more very nonprofit specific trends. There's a lot of those. There's some links to those in that Pinterest board of stuff we didn't even cover here. So you can explore those if you're looking more for that kind of stuff. But there's lots of things that we can explore through the course of 2025. So I'd encourage you, like any of those things that you might be excited about or tools that you want to learn, things that we talked about today, or things that you have challenges with that you're like, let's talk about this, that message me with that, or sort if it's something that you want to lead, we can sort you presenting on it. That this is a good way to frame what is it that we want to maybe focus on some of these things or other things. So think upon those questions. And lastly, unrelated to this, but yet still a little bit like, I wanted to make sure you guys knew that Linden Lab, speaking of tools, also announced that Second Life residents can test and access a Second Life on the web alpha thing that they're testing. It right now looks like they're using streaming technologies to do this. So you're logging in you go to that link, the 0.secondlife.com. It's not even a point one, it's just zero, right? So it's a test, initial test. And you can log into your account. The tool, it will give you a look like the viewer, the Second Life viewer as it is now. Movement and some things are a little different, and some functionalities and how you point on things are a little different, but it's still pretty useful. Right now it's only a test. They're only allowing 10 minutes, but I would encourage you all to do this and to weigh in on comments and thoughts. So it sounds like going forward, they're going to change the UI more towards some amalgam between what we see normally in a viewer and what the mobile viewer they're working on is. So this might be a good time to weigh in. Oh, I love that I can still do some things that are desktop related, because we all know the mobile viewer is not as extensive. So if the web viewer could be a bit middle ground, then it would be useful. It doesn't matter what device you're on. You want to deploy this as easily as possible. You want to send people to an easy way to get on. They just need an account. This could be very exciting. Look at it. We should all comment on it if things change. Also, Buffy, be on the look, since you're that person, seemingly, if they have any similar program to like what they did last time, where they're willing to have people explore and talk about it and that kind of thing. And I'll share again the handout to this. I know it's a lot, and I tried to answer some questions, which kind of also pushed us off a bit, but hopefully it's useful. And I will share the link to the doc again, so that way, if you do not have it, you can access it. Oops. Oop, oop, oop. Let me do this. I may even just do it publish to the web. I'll put it in our folder. And certainly, Zinnia, be more than happy. Take this if you want, or anybody else who's got students, and share it with them as well, or people that might be in your communities, because it's an interesting, like, choose your own adventure of exploring what anybody might want to dive into a little bit more, depending upon what their needs might be. Like for educators, that Cornell University report is deep. Some of the social media topics are very relevant to what you teach, Zinnia. And then, of course, for all of us that are doing stuff, this is all kind of very relevant to projects and things, and how we think about how we get the word out, how we use these tools for what we'd want to do, all that kind of good stuff. Thank you. I hope you guys have a happy 2025. If you've got any other things that you want to bring up or mention, then please do. Otherwise, we'll be back next week. And you have the chat transcript obviously for that. And then I'll have the video that will have even more of this in between conversation stuff that I was riffing off of that is not in the notes. So I'll put that link in this doc as well once it's up on YouTube. So happy new year, everybody. And yay, nonprofit commons in our larger community. Obviously, we didn't talk about that at the beginning. It's also good to frame, I think, the new year with various things. And I appreciate you all and have a lot of gratitude. So that is where I frame that. And I'm looking forward to a good year of this. And if you have any questions more about some of the things I brought up, I'll stick around. Otherwise, to maybe chat about some of those things. Gentle, if you want to talk about your stuff. I'm going to stop the video though on OBS. And then that way I can just chat.